All right, good evening, folks. So my name is Hazel. I am one of the librarians here at Curtis Memorial Library. And I'm just here to do a quick intro. We'll keep it short and sweet. But first off, thank you all so much for coming tonight. I know it's cold and dark outside, and we are here talking about something that can be a little intimidating to folks, which is how to be a sustainable Brunswick, climate action. But the great news is it's so possible. And together we can make it happen. And I know there's a ton of interest here. And this is actually the first, the inaugural lecture of this series. So we're actually going to be having a lecture every month on really great, cool action and ways you can get involved with climate action in Brunswick. And you may not think at first glance that there would be enough for a series every month. And let me tell you, we've got more than enough to talk about and more than enough ways to get involved. So with that, you aren't going to be hearing from me tonight at all. I am so delighted to introduce, we actually have 3 speakers for you tonight that are just going to give you, it's kind of going to be unsatisfying in a way, because they're just going to give you a little taste of everything, but you're just going to want to come back for more. And so in that way, it's okay, because you can quiz them afterwards. Do you folks want questions throughout or at the end?
I think if you can keep us each on like a 25-minute time frame, we can take them as we go. Are you guys comfortable with that?
That's fine.
All right, so we'll take questions as we go. If you have a few too many about your own personal items, we'll ask you to cool it down. But the other thing to note, please be aware that we are recording this and filming this. This will be up online and Television 3. So if you ask a question, other folks will hear you. We are going to be using the mics tonight for that purpose as well, because we want folks to be able to hear us if they miss tonight. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dan Devereaux, as well as then Steve Walker, and then Ashley Charleston. I had to actually look because I didn't know your last names, because I just call you by the first names because they're so lovely to work with. And with that, come on up. You're in for a treat.
I do shoot from the hip on these, and I just use my slides to bring up my recollection. So welcome tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for the Curtis Memorial Library's partnership on this series. It's appropriate. Some people will say that we caused that storm to time these lectures, and the fact of the matter is that we're faced with climate changing. So what we thought we'd do is, to kick off this series, is we'd start with what we're doing locally, and how we react as a municipality. My job is relatively new. It came on board in 2018. My name is Dan Devereaux. I've lived in the town for a very long time. I've raised my family here. I was the harbor master for 15 years, and 10 years before that, I was the Marine warden. And I retired from that job in 2018, and the town made a position called the Coastal Resource Manager. Because by that time, 2018, we were already experiencing climate change on a local level, and had been for about a decade. If people would have asked me, would you ever believe in climate change when I was 18 years old, graduating high school, getting into the Navy, far from having a science or a biology degree or anything like that, I would have told them they were crazy, because we grew up putting oil on the dirt roads and doing stuff like that. But over the course of my career, in the changes that I've seen along the coast of Maine, and the impacts it's had to the fisheries and to the other people, it's really made it obvious that things are changing, and things are changing for good. And I started to look into science and read read the science. So today we're going to talk about what we're doing for projects in Brunswick. So some of the major changes, is it too loud?
Yeah.
Thanks. Ooh, yeah, I got a big voice anyway.
You don't have to speak into it, you can just speak.
Oh, okay, perfect, thank you. It must be more high-tech than the town, because we got to pretty much gobble these things to thank you, Hazel, I appreciate that, because it was annoying me too. So the major changes that we've seen here, or at least I've seen, and one of these, I guess the point of my lecture tonight and why I'm so passionate about giving you guys the information that I've seen over time. And there are a lot of other changes going on, and there are going to be a lot of other speakers in this series, but all of us operate in our own silos. So we're going to talk a little bit about the coastal region in Brunswick, because I'm a coastal geek, and I love our coast. So the oceans are warming. Obviously, Gulf of Maine is warming 99% faster than any other world's oceans. And being on the ocean so long, I've come to learn that all of the species, spawning cycles, and everything else are related on that water temperature. So we're seeing different species in our tidal flats now. In the last decade, we've come along with a lot of quahogs, but we're losing our soft-shell clams. We're gaining invasive species like green crabs, blue crabs, black sea bass, and like I said, there's shifts in those native species. I read a report that indicates that the lobster's population is crawling 43 miles northeast every decade. So, sort of the scientists have determined that, and the biologists and the research that they've done. But if you look back and you think about where the big lobster ports used to be, Gloucester, Massachusetts, Portland, Maine, now it's Stonington, Deer Isle. So that migration is certainly can be backed up with landing data and other stuff like that from the fisheries. So. Storm intensity, prime example of this last sea level rise, the highest rise we've had in Portland on record. It pretty much smoked Bailey Island and all of the mid-coast region. We were pretty safe up here in Brunswick because we're tucked up in the northeast portion of Casco Bay, and we also have these long, shallow embayments, so we don't get those huge crashing waves like they get down at the end of Bailey Island. So we're in a fortunate position in Brunswick particularly, and so we have to make sure that we plan so we can maintain our position into the future. So increased rain events, wind events, shoreline erosion is huge. Fragmented salt marshes is a big problem, and of course our infrastructure susceptibility. We had 3 roads that pretty much overtopped during this last storm. I'd seen in my career here in the last 30 years, I'd seen 1 road overtop. We had 3. So those are areas, those low elevation points, and guess what? All 3 of those are salt marsh crossings. So we need to think as a municipality, and we're doing that now with our engineers on how we can raise road beds, increase flow to the salt marshes. Salt marshes are incredibly important. If the water doesn't get up into the heads of these salt marshes and they're not allowed to flourish, and as the water rises, not allowed to retreat, that really impacts our carbon sequestration. So one of the big reasons that the climate is changing is we all know that it's pretty much our human influence of carbon. So, salt marshes have a value that people don't see because they pay for themselves long term. So we need to make sure that we take those seriously. build our infrastructure so we can allow them to flourish and buy land in the upper portions of them so that we can allow them to retreat over time. So another thing that's going on is acidification. Probably a lot of you have heard of this, coastal acidification. Obviously, when the chemistry and the water changes by, again, carbon, you create carbonic acid, essentially, and that is not good for those critters that are trying to grow shells. We have scientifically proven that. So our local reaction to these changes, well, I've been screaming it since 2010, since reality hit me when I took this job over and initially started working here in 1996, I believe it was, and at that time my predecessor said, you'll never have to worry about these green crabs, because of course I took a job and I was looking at all of the influences, and never have to worry about these green crabs. We don't have the habitat up here. They're all southern stuff. And sure enough, 2010, 11 came around, and people were so scared a mile up the coast because they thought green crabs were going to crawl out of the coast and come up upland. They were so thick. Lobstermen were catching millions of them in their traps. And of course, crabs eat the bait. Lobsters don't go in the traps, so they impact the economy significantly. So since then, we do invasive species monitoring. Every year we have an intern that's assigned to us that collects information on 3 or 4 different crab traps around town, so we can keep track of the densities as we move on to see if they increase and decrease. We collect around 48 different stations and monitor the water quality along the coast in coordination with the Department of Marine Resources. We do eelgrass monitoring, and right now we're trying to do some eelgrass mitigation. So we're trying to convince people that the old block and tackle anchor can be replaced with a more environmentally friendly anchor, which is a screw anchor with some different types of material to run up and hold the boat so it rises and falls with the tide, versus a bottom chain making a big bottom scour and fragmenting our critical eelgrass areas. So we're in the middle of doing that. We've been working on that with homeowners. We completed a comprehensive shellfish development plan with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. We're working with several different agencies, DEP, from DEP to Maine Coastal Program, on 2 different shoreline stabilization projects, and that's one of them that you can see over here, where one of the concerns that we have on a local level right now in our coastal regions is the fact that there are a lot of small coastal bluffs, and coastal bluffs are kind of precious, because what happens is, in the natural progression of sea level rise, the coastal bluffs come up, the coastal bluffs are there, and the sea sort of nourishes the bottom or the mud flats with those coastal bluffs as it slowly pulls it out over time. Well, the problem is that a lot of those coastal bluffs are being threatened because people just don't understand that there are alternatives to concrete and rock to hold back water. Natural alternatives are going to be better long-term for the environment, and it's becoming a concerning fact. If one homeowner does it, say 100 feet of hardscape on their shoreline on a coastal bluff, it's probably not a big deal. But if 50 homeowners do it, or everybody that's developing along the coast does it, then we have cumulative impacts, and we don't know how those are going to impact us long term. So anytime I write a report now for our planning board, I put a cumulative impact statement into that report, and I say, it is determined that these impact at a very small level, these small scale projects, but cumulatively, how much is that going to hurt the overall system? And that's what we're really trying to protect, because the overall system really is is a public benefit, those resources that we want to protect. Community education and planning, we work, again, with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. We've established flood monitoring sites at 5 different locations in the town of Brunswick. So if you go up to a town landing like McCoy Bay and you look, there's a sign that has a little QR code, says, hey, if it's flooding up here, take a picture and send it to this QR code. Sends it to the QR code, and then it logs it, and GMRI monitors that, because really, these digital cameras are amazing. I've got 48,000 pictures on my phone right now of pretty much just Brunswick. So, I mean, I take a picture every time because I know it's getting documented and I know it's getting logged. So, anyway, we also, there's a program called Water Reporter that's promoted by the Friends of Casco Bay and the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership. We, as a town, through my office, are also participating in that. So talk about a little bit about specifics of the impacts, and remember I said 2010, 2011, that's where that big cone goes, about halfway down is about 2010, 2011, this one. Oh, Jim, I almost did it. So that, between the 2 dots in the lower, in the valley there, it starts at 2011 and it ends at 2016. So you can see the dip, and what as a resource manager and what research has said is that what happens is the green crabs come in and they predate on the smaller shellfish. So if you think of shellfish like a corn crop, if the seagulls come in and eat all your crop, then you're not going to have a crop for the next year. But shellfish grow in different ranges in the intertidal based on their size. So what they do is they attack the top of the mud by foraging. So you can see we had an incredible, I mean, these guys were digging this out of a mud flat. We had this incredible inundation, and then, 2 years later, all of a sudden, the entire state softshell clam landings drop out of the bucket. So they not only have an ecological impact, economic impact, they have an ecological impact. In some of the ecological impacts is that when they're foraging, they're denuding all of our seagrasses. So that year when we monitored the seagrass, we had lost almost 90% of it in Casco Bay. So, and seagrasses are really important for a variety of reasons. Wave action, buffering, marine biodiversity, all kinds of stuff. So, not uncommon to see these species along the coast of Maine. Black sea bass. I'm a recreational officer and I catch them in my lobster traps all the time. Now we are routinely catching Chesapeake Bay blue crabs. So if that doesn't convince those folks that are on the water that we're having this issue with warmth and species change, nothing will, because now you have lobstermen with these blue crabs in their traps, and one just sent me, 2 weeks ago, sent me a picture of one that he had hauled up in 100 foot of water. They're here, and Manamet Fisheries, who we also partner in on a couple shellfish restoration projects, is doing that. So if somebody happens to hear of somebody catching a blue crab on the coast of Maine, call Manamet Fisheries and let them know where they caught it, because they're really trying to track that population and see if it's a breeding population. So. Those are eggs, and there is about 380,000 of them attached to that. So crabs are quite prolific. They're amazing creatures of reproduction, especially when the habitat's right for them. So new and old arrivals. There is some slim silver lining. As the water's warm, there are species now that are overtaken in the flats that could eventually replace our soft-shell clam industry and still keep people employed. We have to remember Brunswick is one of the top 3 landing towns in Maine. We are the #1 hard-shell clam leading town, and we have 63 guys that make a living off of the natural resources in this town. So the town has always taken that very seriously. It equates to about 225 jobs locally, and also about 8. I think GMRI said about $8 million. So it's a decent industry here locally. So some of the species that we're getting is the northern quahog. We're right on their range, their northern range anyway, and now that the water's warm, they've become more prolific. So what we've done as a town is we've started to do a propagation program where we're actually buying quahogs from a hatchery and then raising them up until they're a plantable size, because when we get them, they're very, very small, and raise them up to a size and then plant them in the mud flats in hopes that they survive. We have more American oysters, wild American oysters that we've seen, which often occupy the the intertidal rocky areas. And they're native here, but they haven't been around for a very, very long time wild, and now we've started to see those again. So that could be another option for our wild fishermen that are out there. Sea level rise, I guess I don't need to really talk about this much. Hazel, raise your hand when I'm getting too long. Because I can talk on this stuff forever. But anyway, sea level rise, this picture you're looking over here is Thomas Point Beach. That's the erosion at Thomas Point Beach. Though that is no longer there, by the way. That got swept up, and they cleaned it up. But that's the type of erosion that they're experiencing here locally. And like I said, bluffs, this is a man-made bluff essentially, but bluffs like this, when they erode, they replenish the mudflats. So it's critically important that we try to protect those bluffs and allow those natural processes to continue. Increased storms and rainfall. That top one is a very old picture, and if anybody's been down Bunganuk Road, you go down through the dip and you cross over Bunganuk Stream. Well, that I believe is the picture when that road blew out. It blew out back further, but that was from excessive freshwater runoff, I believe, is the reason that road collapsed. We've since built it up. But in saying so and looking at pictures like this, we had 3 roads that overtopped. The Woolwich Route 1 project overtopped. We should look at ourselves in the mirror and go, what are we doing? We need to engineer these things, not for 3 feet, not for 4 feet, but for 6 to 8 feet if we want to last another century and not have to have our kids pay for this stuff every, 30 years. So, yeah, anyway, I'll get off that soapbox, but we have increased storms, increased runoff. All of that is we need that. We need storms, we need rainfall, we need runoff. But the problem is the predictability is not like it used to be, and they're more intense, much more frequent in terms of their duration, shorter, intenser. So ocean acidification. So here you have it explained in a nice graph for you. But essentially, the graph below that shows some tests that were done on shellfish in acidic water. And you can see the pitting of the shell and how they just don't like the more acidic water. And I'm not a scientist, but I can understand that if your acidity level changes, that's probably not a good thing. So this is an interesting stat. The ocean currently absorbs about 1/4 of the human-caused carbon dioxide. So the more carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere, the more we're going to screw up the ocean. That's why people are really concerned about setting emission reduction targets and stuff like that. So abatement, mitigation, adaptation, in my opinion, and equal resistance and sustainability, we have to meet all of the top before we can get to the bottom. So doing that over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a significant amount of push down from the top, from the federal government down in terms of climate change. That ain't gonna fix the problem. It's gonna be people like us that are sitting in this room that convince somebody that the sea level's rising, that this isn't just some cycle. It's gonna be us doing that. So, you know, being able to promote restorative projects, electric vehicles, perfect option, solar power, reducing greenhouse gases any way that you can using restorative aquaculture practices. I've had a lot of shellfish farms pop up in the last decade, including the one that I own and my family runs. We really think that that's a way to give back, and the kids that are working there now are amazing at being able to come to work every day and face the challenges that they face and go home feeling good that, you know, they didn't do anything that's going to hurt the atmosphere or anything like that. They're actually helping. So it's fun to watch, and it's fun to watch that industry grow. We have now 5 farms in town. So in our waters. So, you know, people talk about the Damascotta tribe Brunswick shellfish. They're really amazing. So, and of course, develop these local resource conservation strategies, which is sort of what I'm here to do and sort of hired to do. Shoreline stabilization, just real briefly, I'll run through this. This is essentially salt marsh. You can see in the middle picture. That we've tried to shore up with logs on the top picture, oyster shells and logs on the top picture, and oyster shells and crates on the bottom picture. Pretty big project. We had a lot of volunteers and a lot of agencies that helped with that, and we're really appreciative. Because we gotta slow those salt marshes down because we can't afford really to give up our, number one, to give up the diversity that they create, but number two, to give up the carbon sink and the slow mudflat replenishment that salt marshes are designed for. Developing shellfish resource resiliency. We're beefing up conservation programs around shellfish. The shellfish community, the shellfish harvesters in general, are bonding together to do projects with different organizations to figure out how they can help their own resource. And then support and implement sustainable and restorative practices. And it really is as simple as that. How we can start to change our habits by recycling stuff and understanding the value of open space and understanding the value of green space. And of course, we couldn't do this. This is just a list of all of our partnership that we thought that was involved in a lot of the things that we do at the town of Brunswick, and we couldn't do it without these people. There are some amazing leaders in these organizations. So we couldn't do it without them, but we really need you. You know, we need the public to get behind these practices. We need that. That's why we're here. That's why we're going to have these lectures, and we're going to continue to try to convince people that what happened just last week isn't something that's going to happen every 100 years. It's something that's going to happen every 10 years. 5 years. So that's what we need. We need you guys. So I'm done speaking. I went over my time a little bit. I apologize, Steve. So if you want to hold your questions till the end, that would be awesome, because I know that I want to introduce the next speaker, who's been a friend of mine for many, many, many years. He's involved in so many conservation projects that it's unbelievable. Just hired as the executive director of the Brunswick Topsom Land Trust, and will be making more and more impacts locally than we can imagine. So Steve Walker, he's also a Brunswick Town Councilor and on a bunch of other boards, so I'll let him explain that. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, he's a tough act to follow. So, all right, I'm technically inept here. Do I just hit the arrow?
Oh, sorry, Steve, it's not you anymore.
All right.
I got it.
Yeah, it is me, though.
Yeah, it's all of us, right?
Yes,
That's
it's
what this
all
is
of us.
all about. That's what it's all about. Okay,
Thank you, Hazel.
no problem. Thank you. And,
And thank you all for coming out tonight.
oops. I just wanted to,
Get in there.
how do I full screen it?
All right, while you're doing that, so I wanted to start with, oh, thank you. I'm a news junkie. So before coming here, I was like, let's see what the headlines on climate in Google News are. And this is just for the past week. And I didn't even include the storms. This was before we had the big 2 storms, just recently, the last one. But you see here, I mean, just the reach of the climate issue right now. Billion-dollar weather disasters, the economy is cooling because the globe is heating, 2023 warmest year on record. Property insurance, we're starting to see real economic ties now. I like the municipal bond credit worthiness. I mean, who would have thought, but here we are. Recent severe storms, well, we know that one, millions of dollars in Maine just in the past couple storms. Drought touches a quarter of humanity. Antibiotic resistance is growing, possibly made worse by climate change. This is an interesting one. Coastal populations are set to age sharply as younger people move away from harm's way and go inland or areas that are less susceptible. And then this crazy new denial stuff that's going on social media and YouTube, just what we need. But a couple of my favorites here. The largest great ape to ever live went extinct because of climate change. Turns out the trees adapted to climate and the fruit was out of reach. Anyway. And then the best one that I agree with, educate more girls. Absolutely. I'm not going to stop eating meat, but we certainly need more women in leadership because guys are making dumb decisions. All right, so who am I? Dan introduced me. I'm Steve Walker. About 20 years ago, I used to be the natural resource planner here in Brunswick. Didn't do half the job that Ashley and Dan are doing these days. And from there, my career, I went through inland fisheries and wildlife, a stint at Maine Coast Heritage Trust, working with the great Tim Glidden, back to Fish and Wildlife, and then recently the director of the Land for Maine's Future program before I took the job as executive director of the Brunswick Topsom Land Trust, which I think is definitely the peak of my career now, and that's because I'm so dedicated to thinking globally and acting locally. And I encourage, if you're not already involved in your local land trust, it's a great way to make a local impact and to help build community and solutions that actually fit what's going on here. We've got a big tent, we've got lots of committees, lots of opportunities for volunteerism, so please give me a call. And as you can see in the logo here, we're not just Brunswick Topsom Land Trust anymore. We merged with the Cathans River Education Alliance last May, and I spent the morning on a retreat with the board and staff members about making the best out of that merger. So we're real excited for the years to come here. So just as a little bit of background, some people, I'm always surprised, even town councilors I serve with don't know what the heck a land trust is or what it does, but we're private organizations, 501c3 nonprofits. We're governed by a board of directors. I, of course, have an executive director. We currently at Brunswick Topsom Land Trust have a staff of about 10 to 12, 10 full-time, about 12 seasonally, and which is a pretty big land trust for the state of Maine, a big local land trust. And of course, beyond the board, we've got lots of subcommittees, including a climate subcommittee. And we're entirely funded through private donations, foundation grants, public funding. But our local membership, our community partners and our community members and business partners and business members are really the core of what helps us get done what we get done. Our typical functions, of course, land conservation. That's the sort of the core of what we do, but as a land trust, we protect land in perpetuity. That's sort of beyond the life of one landowner. That's landowner after landowner, that's in perpetuity, which is expensive. So we take our stewardship responsibilities for that land very seriously. Climate change has big implications for how we steward land, and it's certainly increasing the budgets that we have to set aside whenever we acquire land, or even when we acquire easements for monitoring invasives, sea level rise, storm damage, blowdowns of trees, you name it, a lot of the factors that Dan spoke of. Other functions, certainly public engagement. We're really looking forward to building this up now with the merger with the Cattaraugus River Education Alliance. We look to just boost our public outreach efforts because that is so needed right now at the local level especially, to get folks involved. We all need to row in the same direction with climate. It's the only way we're going to tackle this issue. And then one thing that Brunswick Topsom stands out for is our community agriculture programs. Probably most people in this room know of Crystal Spring Farm. We also have other 1,500 acres, I believe, of agricultural lands that we put resident farmers on. We've got a new Mainer's Garden. Of course, we've got the Tom Settlemeyer Community Garden. We really take local agriculture seriously, and I'll talk a little bit more about why we do that and how it fits in with Governor Mills' Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan. So where do land trusts work, and where specifically do we work? If you look at the map of the state of Maine here, there's more than 80 land trusts in Maine, which I think is #1 in the nation. Of course, we've got statewide land trusts like TNC, Nature Conservancy, and Maine Coast Heritage Trust, but most of them are either one town or multiple towns. Our service area extends from Bowdoin south into Topsom and, of course, Brunswick. You can see the stats there, 68 properties that we own in fee, which totals over 3,000 acres, and 23 plus miles of trails. All the trails and most of the acreage are wide open to the public, regardless of whether or not you are a member. Certainly, we encourage everyone to become a member, but our mission is to keep these open in perpetuity for public benefit as well as natural resource benefit. Our mission statement, to conserve and steward natural areas, support a vibrant local food system, connect people with the natural world through inclusive, definitely important, education and recreation programs. Our goal is to protect natural resources, cultivate care for the natural world, and in doing so, foster resilient, connected communities now and for generations to come. And climate change is really becoming right central to the core of what we do. These are the high points of our current strategic plan. We just updated this last year. And you can see, integrate climate change, mitigation, and adaptation more explicitly in our land, stewardship, agriculture, and education programs in line with the Maine Climate Action Plan. Other things, of course, continue, if not amplify, our land protection programs, stewardship, expand youth education, and I would widen that to include adult outreach, programming for seniors. We brainstormed a lot this morning, so I'm real excited about the future of education programs we will be providing. And advocacy, of course, is becoming more and more important to us too. We expect to be both at the State House up in Augusta as well as town halls in Bowdoin, Topsom, and Brunswick, trying to support good efforts and also to help bolster our mission. So how do we intersect with statewide work? Hopefully you've all heard of Maine Won't Wait, the Governor's Climate Action Plan. If not, I certainly encourage you to get on the web and scroll through it. But for our work at BTLT, I just wanted to highlight two strategies. One falls under the natural resource economy, and currently there's work underway to fulfill this 30% food production by 2030. And that is going to take preserving agricultural land, which we're currently doing, but then beyond that, finding support mechanisms for the support networks that local farmers need. How to distribute, how to sell products, how to store products, how to process products. So there's a lot to it. And certainly Seth and Maura at Crystal Spring Farm are a great example statewide. And we're hoping to bring more of that online as the years come. And I'm proud to say that our farmers market, our Saturday's farmers market at Crystal Spring has now won best in the state 2 years in a row. So we hope to, I think you'll be hearing some exciting news in the next few months, if not a year out, about how we're expanding these programs. And that's very significant for climate purposes, of course. You cut out the transportation if you're shopping locally. You're cutting out poor agricultural practices elsewhere that certainly drive up the climate issue through unsustainable practices. The other strategy I wanted to highlight was protecting Maine's environment and working lands and waters. We have always at BTLT taken seriously biodiversity and where lands provide the greatest ecosystem services, and highlighting those as focus areas of our work. You can see it's tough to see, well, at that scale it might not be too hard, but the black circles here are designated focus areas that we have throughout the 3-town service area, where we've looked at data from the state, like beginning with habitat data, from Fish and Wildlife and Maine Department of Marine Resources, Nature Conservancy, all the sort of resource expertise we can pull together in the state, plus local knowledge of these lands to try to highlight things like where we have large unfragmented forests that are becoming more and more critical for carbon sequestration, as well as species diversity and habitat, where the best properties and areas are that buffer our water resources, so riparian corridors along streams, and of course the coastal resources that Dan just talked about, specifically now marsh migration and areas that can pull nutrients out of surface water runoff before they hit our economically valuable bays. The little sort of green line spreadsheet over there, I know it's impossible to read, but for each of our focus areas, we've gone through and we've tried to highlight, or at least catalog, what the benefits and services and features of each of those focus areas are. So when a piece of property comes up, it helps us prioritize internally. And we're working very closely now with the Maine Climate Council in terms of helping to fulfill the 30% land conservation by 2030. We share that goal, and I'm actually on that working group currently to try to flesh out what the targets are. So some of our priority actions currently, of course, I mentioned earlier that we have a climate change working group that worked through our strategic action plan, our strategic plan, and continues to generate ideas and new directions for our programming. Combine the best available science with traditional knowledge of the natural world to ensure our work supports exceptional ecosystem functioning and resilience. Every action we take in terms of our properties, we try to think through what the adaptive or mitigation effects of those actions are. Farming I've talked about, but we're really exploring this concept of regenerative farming, looking at soil health very carefully and trying to get as low carbon budget practices on the ground as we can. Demonstrating, sort of leading by example, how our organization can reduce its carbon footprint through vehicle miles, through stewardship practices and other things, to sort of be an example both for the communities we work in and other land trusts throughout the state. Getting into some of the specific goals in the areas we work in land protection, certainly mitigating or slowing climate change underlies all of our efforts in terms of land protection, and that includes things I already mentioned, like protecting large blocks of forest for sequestration, also marsh migration areas, things of that nature, riparian zones, farmland. Anyway, you can see them there. Stewardship, additionally, we tailor our stewardship practices to be as climate responsible as possible. Of course, the burning here, you say, wait a minute, that doesn't look, but that's to maintain. We have a lot of pyrophilic, which means fire-loving, natural communities here in Brunswick and some in Topsom as well, because of the outwash, the glacial outwash sand deposits we have through the middle of town. So certainly maintaining biological diversity goes hand in hand with a response to climate change, because a more diverse environment, of course, is a much more resilient environment. Our trail work, we are now planning, of course, for high water events, flooding, coastal events, invasive species. Dan talked about green crabs and others. We're wrestling with jumping worms and woolly adelgid come into play for us as well as others. Education-wise, and I'm sort of just scratching the surface here, of course, we have education programs now in the Topsom and Brunswick schools for all elementary students, but we're...
I just need to grab that.
Yeah, take it. There we go. But we're also directly involved with putting together sustainability and alternative energy projects for students who come to the Cadance River Education Camp during the summer, and we also integrate these topics into what we take directly to the schools and work with teachers in the schools so they can then carry on the lesson plan even when we're not in the classroom with them. Here's some of the field trips I wanted to highlight based on renewable energy. Here's a student using a wind meter. We also talk solar energy and again, sustainable practices in terms of solid waste and other topics. Like Dan's slide, we don't do this alone. We've got lots of partners that we're proud to work with, everything from the feds down through the state, other nonprofits, as well as the 3 municipalities in our service area. And specifically, just using Brunswick as an example, how we work with municipalities, I'd like to think that we help implement growth plans by doing strategic conservation in rural areas. We support zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan priorities by protecting riparian areas, coastal areas, including coastal access for our fishermen and women, and water quality as well. We're currently involved in the Mare Brook management plan, the perimeter trail at the former Naval Air Station. We try to get involved with as much local planning as we feel we can bring value-added services. We work tightly, of course, with the Brunswick Parks and Rec to fulfill priorities in the 2002 Open Space Plan, from the river to the bay. I coordinate with the Parks Director all the time on new trail projects. We can bring funds to the table if we're eligible for grants the town may not have the capacity to chase. It's just really nice level of coordination. And it even goes to the school department where we have dedicated staff who have put together science-based curriculum for elementary school age children. We currently have elementary classes from both SAD 75 and Brunswick coming to our Cadance River Education facility every year, bringing the students through that. I think has been, I don't know, close to 15 years now in the making. So we have kids that have graduated college who are now coming back and becoming members of our organization who came through that program. But it's a great model to try to indoctrinate children at that age as good community members to expand our reach. And, you know, that's how we get hope for change in the future. So that's the extent of my presentation. Again, I just want to encourage you all to get involved. You know, as Hillary said, it takes a village. So thank you, and I'll hand it over to Ashley. Yeah, we have time for questions from Dan or me.
I will get this very quickly loaded up.
Did you want that in questions?
Yeah,
We'll take them.
yeah, certainly.
I wanted to ask how you define a coastal bluff.
So there is definitions, and if you go on the Department of Conservation, Agriculture, and Forestry, you can easily get the definition, but essentially a coastal bluff is a certain texture of sand and other material that sits at least, I think, 4 feet above the hard pan. So I don't know if Steve might know it. Huh?
Can it be significant?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of them are a lot bigger. But the problem is we got one big one here in the town of Brunswick. It's Bunganuk Bluffs, and that's 65 to 70 feet high. But then we have all of these little smaller ones that are on the outsides of like small peninsulas and stuff off of like Muir Point and Middle Bay and the New Meadows. And the properties are abutting those, and people are concerned about losing their property, so they're trying to, and rightfully so, they're trying to save some of their property, but I'm not sure that we have the right information out there for the people to have options. In other words, if you go to a developer and say, my land's eroding, the developer is most likely not going to try to figure out the cheapest way out of that because it doesn't benefit him. Not saying that, you know, you find the strongest way initially, but anyway, that's what we're experiencing. The coastal bluffs are really important.
Yeah, after the day after that big storm, I went down to Pelly Beach on Bailey Island, what is now called Seabank, which in my father's time was just a slope down to the ocean, you know, because Jesse Johnson used to graze his cows on it, you know. But then after the cows left, you got this big bluff, huge cave-in down there, mud over both ends of the Bailey Island Bridge, shingles off of buildings everywhere. I just thought of it because of the bluffs. I mean, I think you would call that a bluff. And in my life, I sent that off to a whole bunch of cousins and everything. In our lifetimes, we've never seen a cave-in like that, like there is right now down there on that beach. Now, that sea bank is, in that particular place, is hundreds of feet from the houses. But farther down the beach south, that is not the case. And it was just huge. I have a cool picture of it, but it's just huge.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And then in addition, off what's called the jib lot, there's another piece of land there, cut off about 8 or 10 feet of the sod, right there on top of the ledges. I mean, talk about erosion. I've never seen anything like it. It's quite something. Plus, after cutting off all that sod, or just washing it out to sea, threw a tree up about 20 feet to it. You know, it's like, okay, this was a big storm.
Yeah, what I've learned is water does not yield to anything,
Right.
including infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it was the direction of it too that did it, you know.
All right, so I think what we'll do is, on that kind of dramatic note, which I think we could all keep talking about. Like I said, there's some good stuff here. We are going to be here every month, so you get to come and join us. But for now, I want to make sure we have time to let Ashley give you another little teaser about all the cool stuff that she's working on with the town. And then at the end, we still are going to open up for some more questions, all right? So with that, Ashley.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Make sure this is close enough. Okay, so we'll just jump right into it. So thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Ashley Charlson. I'm the environmental planner for the town of Brunswick. And before I jump into what my work entails here, I just wanted to give you a bit on my background, which is extensive beyond environmental planning. I've done a lot of work in fisheries, aquaculture with oysters, environmental education with kids, and wildlife conservation. But as your environmental planner, my work focuses primarily and currently on our watersheds and climate action planning efforts. So with that said, let's dive right into watersheds, so to speak. You may now laugh if you'd like. So if you step foot in any part of Brunswick, you're basically in a watershed, and with a town of over 20,000 people, balancing human needs and human impact with watershed health is very important. And while there are 8 watersheds in our town, tonight I'm going to focus on one primarily, that being Mare Brook. So Mare Brook is a 5.7 mile stream with about 4.7 miles of drainage within our town boundary, and it's impaired due to poor macroinvertebrate presence and habitat, and is under stress from mixed urban use, including transportation, commercial use, single-family residence, urban open space, and forested and otherwise non-forested wetlands. So despite the stress, the stream does provide quality habitat for brook trout, as well as public recreational access like residential districts, the landing and conservation lands, as well as ice skating, kayaking at Coffin Pond. It's also economically significant due to its drainage into important shellfish growing areas, and it also serves a very important part of our stormwater management system, at least within that watershed. So why is the water quality so poor? Well, again, it's because of a high percentage of impervious cover. Impervious cover is anywhere that's basically developed, your parking lots, buildings, paved roads, et cetera. And that's because it increases runoff, which essentially then takes that polluted runoff right into our watersheds. We also have legacy pollutants, especially concerning the former naval base, or naval air station, I should say. But otherwise, major sources of stress include physical habitat alteration, low recruitment, poor water quality due to pollution threats, and again, increased stormwater, rising temperatures, and low dissolved oxygen. So now that we know the main sources of stress, we turn to our project partners, those being Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District, and our friends at the DEP, seeking their guidance as to how to implement the recommendations that were included in the watershed management plan that was developed. And this 10-year plan is essentially broken up into phases, and those phases are meant to piecemeal work on culverts, crossings, tributaries that are otherwise clogged, rotting, they're preventing habitat connectivity, things like that. So the picture you see on screen is a culvert we completed this past June, and it was the first one, so it was really exciting. Everyone was really happy, especially me, because who doesn't love a giant bow and cartoonishly large scissors? But it was with folks at the Thornton Oaks Retirement Community Center, so that was really fun. And I just wanted to give a quick nod to our funding source, and that's through the EPA grant, which is essentially supported through the Clean Water Act. And it supports communities protecting and restoring watersheds, and for those who are working to implement water quality improvements or address specific problem areas. And before I move on to climate action, I just want to check, how many of you are familiar with the terms mitigation and adaptation? That's good. That's a respectable amount. I'm pretty pleased. It's also okay that you don't know. But to put it simply, mitigation means you're making something less bad or reducing the risk of loss due to the occurrence of some undesired event or action, while adaptation refers to the process by which the process of change or which something or someone becomes better suited to a situation or an environment. But when you use them in the context of climate change, they actually take on a slightly different meaning. So mitigation for climate change means avoiding and reducing, creating more emissions to the point being to prevent further warming, while adaptation refers to an altering of our behavior and systems, and in some cases, ways of life to protect our family, our economies, our infrastructure, and the environment we live in from the further impacts of climate change. I just wanted to review those briefly since I'll be using them occasionally here and there. So this climate action plan that we're making is basically in response to the fact that our climate is changing. And this is happening due to the greenhouse gas effect, which I'm not going to review too much in depth. I'm sure you're all very aware of, or at least have heard it in conversation here or there, but essentially burning fossil fuels adds heat trapping gases like a blanket, and it alters our temperature, precipitation patterns, et cetera. Big takeaway, human activity is causing an accelerated rate of warming for our planet. So what are we experiencing here in Maine? Again, won't go over in huge detail since my two friends did that quite extensively, but on an almost daily basis, the media platforms across the state are as flooded with news concerning the impacts of climate change as our roads have been in these past few storms. So from rising temperatures, increasing storm intensity, shifting economic opportunities, essentially each year these impacts become more and more pronounced, and our residents in Brunswick are the ones who suffer. So in December of 2022, Brunswick became the 6th town to engage in the climate action planning process after we received a grant to create a plan that allows us to focus on the individual needs of our community. And there are 3 main groups facilitating this plan, that being GPCOG, or Greater Portland Council of Governments, which is the consultant helping us navigate this process. We also have the Climate Action Task Force, which is a committee composed of locals created to make sure that this plan is representative of our town, as well as you. Whether you're a student, business owner, resident, or part of a local organization, everyone's input is important in this process. And when you boil it down, the goal of this entire process is to develop strategies to help reduce our town's emissions, build resilience, and prepare you all to be able to adapt to climate change in the future. So what goes into making this plan? It's got 3 main components: a GHG inventory, or greenhouse gas inventory, a vulnerability assessment, and a whole lot of community engagement. Starting with the greenhouse gas inventory, this was completed by collecting a lot of data from the state, town, and staff of your local municipality, as well as local utility providers related to transportation, waste, and energy use. And with that information, we calculated a rough estimate of our town's emissions and then set an emissions reduction target, the goal of which being to reduce those numbers over time. And December 4th of 2023 is when we went to town council and they approved our emissions reduction goals, those being a reduction in emissions of 65% by 2030 and hoping to be net zero by 2050. So, excuse me. In setting an emissions reduction target, we're essentially asking you to choose how aggressively you aim to reduce your town's emissions. I do want to emphasize those goals are non-binding. It's meant to be an aspirational benchmark to work towards, and basically helps us to prioritize future actions for mitigation. Other components of this plan are the vulnerability assessment. So while climate impacts are the actual impacts of the climate change on groups of people, places, ecosystems around town, vulnerability refers to the ways in which our town is negatively affected by climate change. So we all obviously experience levels of vulnerability in conjunction with those impacts in a different way, because not everyone experiences those impacts equally. your existing vulnerabilities are going to impact how you feel the effects of climate change. So understanding where those vulnerabilities are as a community is very important because it tells us where to put our resources, time, and effort, and just to give you a better picture as to what I'm talking about concerning vulnerability and how that impacts people differently. So an elderly population might be more vulnerable to heat stress, or cost burden folks are more heavily reliant on fossil fuels and volatile, and are thus more subject to their volatile prices. Folks in slightly, folks that are in lower areas are obviously more subject to flooding and property damage when we get a lot of rain. So just as an example. But lastly, most importantly, public input, again, is a very vital part of this process. And my favorite example I've been using lately is likening public input in this plan to having a suit or dress tailored. So you picture it, your friend's getting married, she makes you buy this dress that she swears is really cute and that you'll wear again, but you won't. But you buy a dress that's a size or two larger than you need so that you can have it tailored to fit you perfectly. So if you don't get the dress tailored, that super cute dress will look even less cute. And if we don't get public input on this plan, it won't fit our community the way we need it to. With that said, I just want to make a quick plug for our second climate action workshop. It is March 7th from 6 to 8 p.m., doors at 5:30 at the Coffin School. And this is where we'll be asking the public to give us some indication of preference and priority as far as a list of actions and strategies that we could possibly incorporate into the plan. So tell your friends, take a photo. We're going to be blasting this information out all over the place, but I hope you will join us. And I won't bore you by reading all of these details line for line, but the bottom line is there are clear benefits to developing a plan, such as better health, cost-saving measures, natural resource preservation, to name a few. And there are also clear consequences of doing nothing, and I think we've seen quite a bit of that lately around here, especially as it pertains to personal and public property, unfortunately. So we can clearly see that human activity is impacting the earth, and it's true that this topic isn't always the most cheerful, but it's important to remember two very important things. Hope is not lost. Engaging in this process is how you can have a hand in shaping the future. And this is not your fault. I'm not the cause of climate change. You're not. None of you in this room are the reason that we are experiencing the impacts that we are. But that doesn't mean you can't be part of the solution. So through these efforts, we can take positive action by pursuing more sustainable solutions. You can take action to protect the people, places, and ecosystems you love. Your voices, when put into action, can be drivers of change, especially when put in unison. And this plan, I want to emphasize, is all about making decisive action now to ensure a more sustainable future. With that, we would be happy to take your questions, and thank you for listening. And that's our contact info if you want to shoot us an email. Do you guys want to come back up in case there are more questions?
Sure.
Before we open it up to questions, I think they all deserve a round of applause. I learned something.
The definitions of mitigation and adaptation.
It's all good. It's all good. So as I said, it's just, it was good, right? But wasn't it just a little unsatisfying? Did you get all of your climate questions answered? I know, I just had more. So with that, we're going to be here. This is not the last you'll see of them, but now you've got a few minutes to quiz them hard. So please raise your hands and let us know what you want to know.
I don't have a question, but I have something I've noticed. I live off Route 24 in Hartsville, right across the bridge, and the marsh before Princess Point, I have never seen the water so high. It covers the grass. You can't even see that it is a marsh. Any comment?
We're in search of a grant right now to replace that culvert and possibly lift that road a little bit. So we'll be nourishing the upper marsh, because on the other side of Coombs Road, there's also an extensive marsh system there that we'd love to be able to make a little bit more healthy. And so that was one of the areas where the water was up over the road.
What Dan just listed is also an example of some of the strategies that we're considering including in the climate action plan. So if you think it's a good idea, come tell us on the 7th. I will not stop plugging that workshop.
You shouldn't.
Speaking of that area, has there been any talk of eastern plume or addressing that from the naval station?
That's, the eastern plume is on a long list of things that we're looking at in that area. We just lost some of our shellfishing grounds over in that area. And as you know, they're doing, and I have to apologize because I was once a sailor stationed at that base and in charge of, putting ethanol glycol on airplanes to de-ice them, and it was pretty intense. So I have to apologize, but that is on the list, and Ashley is monitoring the mitigation of those ponds pretty closely, and we're checking in with the feds all the time, make sure that they're keeping on the ball. But they've been good. They've been really good partners. They don't want to leave a mess behind. So
There are, and I believe that they're public, but Restoration Advisory Board meetings. I think the next one is on the 24th, but that is where, so I'm not personally monitoring the pollution remediation efforts there, but I do attend the meetings. So if anyone is interested, they do provide updates at these meetings. I can email you the link if you're interested. That's my email address up there, and I'd be happy to send that your way. It is free. Other questions? Yeah.
So I heard that Brunswick is getting one of the new electric car chargers, and I was wondering through that grant that came through from the federal government, and I wondered where it's going to go.
Ooh, it's an economic development question, but I think we got it was the the energy efficiency conservation block grant.
yeah, and
I forget where exactly we're installing them, but I think we're getting 2, is it level 3 chargers?
Yeah.
2 level 3 chargers. I forget exactly where they're putting them, but Chrissy Adamowitz in the Economic Development Department would know exactly where those are going, and I'm kicking myself because I should know this off the top of my head, but right now the brain, she's a sieve. Sorry about that, but we are getting some.
we have some. We have some chargers already at the Spring Street station, don't we? If we don't, that's where they're going, I think.
I think you're right.
So the Spring Street station, which is right there, right across the way, really close, but probably the cord won't reach to the Curtis. We need to get a couple in the Curtis Memorial Library parking lot.
But if you want more, you should tell us at the workshop on the 7th. It starts at 6.
And one of the problems with electric cars that I hear is that people who are on the cusp of wanting to switch over are worried that the infrastructure just isn't set up yet to be able to support, that continued use, especially if you're traveling over distances. So once we get that, it'll be awesome.
If any of you are interested in electric vehicles, we actually have a program on that we did, and it is recorded, and you can see it with some other folks in the state.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there any talk about increasing public transportation options around here? Because I know, like, electric cars are cool, but we don't have enough
Yeah, I mean,
raw materials to put every person.
Yeah, so we're definitely looking into that for sure. There are a lot of strategies that we're considering and exploring further as I don't hate to reference it again, but as part of the climate action planning process. So obviously EVs are just the very classic, easy go-to as far as reducing emissions, because transportation is really, personal passenger vehicle transportation is the biggest culprit, unfortunately. But, everyone's got to go to work, make money, feed their families, so I get it. But we are looking into other forms of more sustainable transportation, increasing bus routes, making certain aspects of the town more walkable, more bikeable. But support from the community indicating preference for those things is what will really help to push it and include it in the plan. Steve, did you want to say anything?
I'll spin my hat around, and as a town councilor here in Brunswick, we're always looking, at least I am, and I think the majority of the council now will be looking into alternative transportation much more closely, including reducing, if not eliminating, fees locally. So stay tuned and always contact your town councilor with these suggestions, and go to the March 7th.
March 7th at the conference
There,
hall,
yes.
6 p.m. Any other questions?
Could you give an update on the McCoy Bay watershed study?
Yes, I wanted to include another slide about that, but my computer was grumpy at me today and stopped working halfway through finishing my presentation, so I didn't get there. But the water quality study, currently we are waiting on our consultant, FB Environmental, to send us a work plan. They're drafting that right now. We should hopefully have a draft of the plan. So basically by work plan, I mean, how they'll carry out the sampling and all the logistics concerning that. And what we'll do once we get that next week is review it internally and have our water quality task force. It's a local committee composed of experts related to water quality, et cetera. We'll have them review it as well and make sure that we think it includes everything we feel it should, and then we should expect the study to start, or the sampling to begin, I would say probably maybe early to mid-April, hopefully. But that's unfortunately the most we have to update. I feel like I saw your hand, and then I'll go to you, sir.
This is kind of a question for Dan. When I was at Brunswick High School, we were doing a clam research project. It was with Andrew McCullough and Mr. Wilson. Is that still ongoing? Is that still happening? Any forward progress on that?
I know exactly because I was heavily involved in that. Andrew is still doing we're not doing the clam growing project anymore, but Mr. McCullough has a group of independent study people that are, setting traps and monitoring green crabs and getting used to getting out on the mud flats and checking traps and baiting traps and counting the critters, all the critters that are inside of those traps. So that connection is really, really important. I'll tell you, when we started that program, it was probably, when did you graduate?
2019.
Yeah, we started it probably in 2017, and when we polled the Brunswick High School students, over 80% of them didn't even know where the ocean was. Honest to God. And it's a mile down the road. It's really important to make those connections in particular, like the Land Trust is trying to make the connection with the Catanis River Education Alliance, really getting the information out to our younger generations that these opportunities exist. We need more biologists, we need more scientists working on the water. They don't do us any good sitting in an ivory tower up at the University of Maine. They got to be on the water, and they got to see the changes themselves. And so when we get folks, something planted in her head, and she's here tonight, and so that type of stuff we need to do more of and encourage more of that.
Kathy mentioned the Deer Brook is impacted, and you said it was due to runoff and other things. But what particular pollutants are issues, I guess, what particularly is causing, acid, not enough oxygen, chloride, et cetera?
Yeah, so what impaired, I referenced, has a lot of different meanings. You know, obviously, habitat connectivity was one I mentioned, and that's a lot of the culverts being undersized. That's why you saw a lot of roads flooding. It's water passage isn't really getting where it needs to, or it's just been completely cut off. But in terms of, you know, pollutants, and when I mentioned having low dissolved oxygen, so what contributes to that? As far as low dissolved oxygen goes, excessive amounts of salt use on winter roads. That, he's giggling because we scream about this in our office all the time. It's our Roman Empire. But so anyway, excessive salt use, when that funnels into the watershed, that's what reduces the amount of dissolved oxygen available to other species, and that's what fish and other you know, creatures of that nature need in order to be able to breathe underwater. But then on top of that, you have fertilizers, other different nutrients, pesticides, all of those things going into the watershed contribute further to not only just declining water quality in general, but when it funnels down eventually into the bay, that in conjunction with rising water temperatures is what causes all those massive blooms, which then, as soon as the algae dies off, the die-off also takes more oxygen out of the water, and it's just kind of this never-ending cycle of terrible.
So if you, just quickly, this is Ashley's, if you don't know where Marybrook Watershed is, you know where the pumping station is on Main Street, because if you head south on Main Street, you get to the pumping station, you're gonna cross Marybrook. People like to feed the ducks right there, so they conjugate, you get hundreds and thousands of ducks that overwinter when they should be going south. So if you feed the ducks there, please do not do that. That causes nutrient loading, and downstream, we have issues. But
Marybrook is the orange one.
Yeah, Scott, sorry. I was doing
Hang?
this one
Yep, that
so
one.
they can see it. But that covers almost all of, goes right across our growth zone. Runs across the base, and it comes out on Harpswell Cove. Poor Harpswell Cove. The pollution from the base is bad enough. Now we've got to add all of our pretty much growth district into that drainage zone. So, you know, making sure that we make this more resilient and start to plan a little bit better around waterways that lead down to the ocean, because we can't be dumping fertilizers and pesticides so that they run directly off into the water, and that's happening a lot in this town. We don't have a fertilizer and pesticide ordinance for private owners, but we do have one for town, for the town's property. So the town can't put pesticides or fertilizers on their fields unless they're approved environmentally friendly one. But yes, go ahead. You can interrupt me.
Question: how much of Marybrook is actually involves private property? In other words, does the stream itself, is it entirely under control of the town? Or
No.
Are the segments of it that pass through private property owned by the property owners?
Yes, they're owned by the property owners, and that's why we need to make an effort to be able to do this as a team, and, you know, address the planning issues, some of the land use practices that people have gotten used to. Green lawns aren't cool anymore. I just hate to tell everybody, they are not cool.
What mechanisms do you have to be able to do something about it?
So we are looking into updating the pesticide ordinance, at least initially, as it applies. So let me backtrack. So the way that we regulate is through zoning and certain ordinances in certain zones. So we're looking at updating and obviously strengthening a pesticide ordinance in what we call the shoreline protection zone, which basically is this little tiny buffer that, not tiny, what is it, about 75 feet? Yeah, 75 feet around, streams, rivers, waterways, things of that nature. So we are looking into, currently actively looking into figuring out updating a pesticide ordinance in that area, at least just as a super quick way to try and prevent further
And then how do you
runoff.
enforce it?
That's part of the problem.
I just wanted to put up our names again.
Yeah.
And it seems to me at a certain point that one, you've got to be able to identify, if we're gonna do any enforcement, you've got to identify that a particular product or item came from a particular property.
Yep.
Okay, which means now you've got to have testing in place, and then you've also got to have the enforcement aspect of being able to strong arm them into not doing whatever the hell it is that they were doing.
So we are currently looking at examples of other towns' ordinances that have been successful, and not only trying to get some outreach and education going, but emulate the methods that they're using. But we are currently having conversations with, we've got our Conservation Commission involved, and they're helping to lead that charge. We're going to involve a few other committees and town staff and talk to code enforcement officers once we have those ideas. But we've basically just been able to really get the ball rolling on this in the last 2 months.
Can I just follow up
Yeah,
real
go
quick? You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Because we can't enforce the zoning ordinance like we should, in terms of, because it's very expensive, number one. The zoning ordinance is essentially a voluntary compliance document for the environment anyway. But if you want to build a house, you better have the electrical codes, you better have the studs a certain distance and all of that. But for the environment, it's really voluntary compliance. We can't tell who's putting pesticides on their lawns if there was a law against it, but if there was a law against it, it discourages it, and it sets our values as a community and says, look, we realize this is voluntary compliance. We realize we aren't going to be able to enforce it. We can't afford to enforce it, all of it. But we want you to know that these laws are really important to our community, and as a private landowner, your land impacts the public resources, and we hope that you come on the team and set your pesticide use and fertilizer use further back from the stream.
Just one last before I take another question. While we are looking into ways to enforce it, we also recognize and are looking into positive education and outreach campaigns and, positive reinforcement kind of actions that can be taken, because no one likes to be told what to do. It's always better if you get people to voluntarily do something in a way that makes them feel good about it. It gets a much more positive reaction and a lot more compliance. So we are looking into both methods, but you are correct. It's all hands over there. Yeah.
Just kind of related to that question, and this might be kind of getting to that, the carrot's always better than the stick, but in terms of any kind of ordinance related to like pesticide sale, pesticide use, for example, is there any like mechanism that could be applied to like sale of pesticides within town boundaries, like at Lowe's, or for example? I don't know if that's something under like what Brunswick can do.
We are looking into that as well. There's a massive brainstorming board that we've got going on, but we would have to still look into, what it would take to execute something like that, but it's not an option that is off the table. We are considering that. Sorry, in the back.
So you also mentioned that in Mirror Brook, you would find brook trout, which is of course an indicator of very clean water. So where do you find them? Where are they? I mean, if this is a bad stream, where are they?
That's more historically speaking, but go ahead, Steve.
Okay.
I may have misspoke.
Last year.
No, there is a very healthy brook trout, well, not very healthy, but there is a brook trout population that goes all the way up. I live on Bowden Street, which is in the upper watershed. The picture's down, don't bring it up, it's fine. But on the street just south of the college, and I can go out and catch 4-inch brook trout in the stream within walking distance of my house. They make it up past Coffin Pond and into the tributaries, and the reason why is because, like I mentioned with my pyrophilic reference to these glacial outwash sands, we have a ton of groundwater coming through that sand feeding these streams, which regulates the temperature to the extent that we can maintain dissolved oxygen despite all the other challenges. And we do have brook trout all the way up into the center of town, which is great given how they're blinking out throughout the range in the Northeast. Maine has become like the last stronghold for brook trout in their range. And the fact that we can still have healthy populations here in Brunswick speaks to the fact that we have things to be hopeful about. Going back to the original discussion, I'm going to go past 7:30, but that's all right. Going back to the original discussion, in 2003, Brunswick set the setback distance from streams to 75 feet. We're one of the only towns in Maine that has that. Shoreland zoning only goes to the confluence below 2 perennial streams, yada, yada, yada. And that applies to, like, I don't know, 10% of the streams in most towns. In Brunswick, we made the choice to regulate activities within 75 feet of every stream that makes the DEP definition. So if it's just a small 6 months flowing scoured mineral bottom stream, you have the same setback. And we made that decision seeing that natural solutions and natural buffering is the best approach, and it is enforceable if we actually get a code enforcement officer out on the ground to check these things. But I, as a town councilor, and I'll say that on television, that 75 feet is woefully we need to get to 100 anyway on these streams, either side, and it needs to be no cut. We can't have people putting lawns in there and stuff like that. So that's what I would advocate for as a town councilor, and any other towns around here tops them. That'd be a great project, you know.
Hey, Steve, do you know where you can do that?
Where?
Do you know where you could do that? At the Climate
Oh,
Action
yeah,
Workshop
March
on the
7th.
At the Coffin School, 6 p.m.
All right.
So I think we all know we've got a few challenges, right? And if you didn't know I learned of a few more tonight that I am like, oh, well, guess what? Lots of challenges, but at the same time, they all have solutions. They might not be the solutions that we wanted at first, but there are solutions out there. And so I really hope you will join us as we continue this series and we go into depth on some more of these topics, and give us feedback on what you would like to hear more about, because that is something that we absolutely want to hear. Yeah.
Is there a set date and time for these meetings?
Yes. So in fact, about 6 months worth are already on our calendar here, but it is the third Wednesday every month. Same time, same place. We will have them recorded, but you should come in person, because then you'll get your questions answered by excellent experts like these folks.
And if you still have questions, feel free to shoot us an email. We love to answer.
Yes,
we
we
love
love
emails.
And if for some reason you can't make the next couple of lectures of these, where could you give feedback?
At
Climate
Action Workshop on the 7th.
Yeah.
So one thing before we go, thank you all for coming. Just to recognize Poppy Arford is in the room. She's one of the local legislators. So legislators are important in this messaging.
Send her
So
emails.
Poppy likes to hear from her constituents, and that's one way to make a little bit of an impact, is talk to your local legislator. So thank you, Poppy, for coming.
Yeah, thank you all.
And again, thank you all for hanging out with us and giving us some more information. So. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.